What is up, guys? Mike here, the Detroit Borg, checking out the new Moto G4 and the G4 Plus. So we're going to take a look at both phones in this video. These are successors to the Moto G3, which was one of my favorite budget smartphones from last year. In terms of pricing, both phones start off with 16 gigs of storage at $199 and $249. The Moto G4 can be upgraded to 32 gigs for $30 more, but the Moto G4 Plus gets a little extra, so you can upgrade that to 64 gigs of storage with 4 gigs of RAM. That's a $100 upgrade. Now, if you're concerned about storage because 16 gigs is pretty small, you can use the micro SD card slot for adaptable storage, so you can upgrade the storage later. Now, both of these phones are highly customizable like all Moto phones, so you can configure the back panel, the trim colors, and just about anything you want right on the Moto site, and they'll send it out to you from the factory in your configuration. So you can really customize this and personalize this, which is very unique, especially among budget smartphones. So before we talk about what's different, let's get to the unboxing. Now, worth pointing out here is that Motorola was purchased out by Lenovo. So although this is a Moto phone, Motorola is no longer here. You'll see the Lenovo branding instead. So let's get to the unboxing. First, let's start off with the Moto G4. So if we open up the lid, very basic packaging, you'll find the phone front and center with a label highlighting its major features. So getting to the accessories, you won't find any headphones, but you do get a wall adapter and a micro USB charging cable. Now, the wall adapter is Motorola's turbocharger, so this will rapidly charge the battery of your Moto G4. That's the first time we've seen that on their budget phone, so it's nice that that is included at this price point. And of course, we get a set of paperwork in multiple languages. Now, getting to the G4 Plus, exact same packaging, and the phone is roughly the same in terms of its design, but obviously the big difference here is that we have a fingerprint button at the bottom, which is not present on the other Moto G4. And in terms of the accessories, they're identical. Still no headphones, but we get a turbocharger and a micro USB cable. So the labels on the front obviously are different depending on the model, so the G4 Plus and the G4 have different features which they're highlighting on these labels, and we can go ahead and peel these off. Obviously, the next step here is to boot them up and get them set up. And what you will see on the G4 Plus is a fingerprint setup, which you won't get obviously with the standard G4, and it works very similar to other fingerprint setups. You just scan whatever finger you want, and you can add as many fingers as you want during the setup process. Now, in terms of this fingerprint scanner, it is raised above the glass, so it really sticks out, so you can definitely feel for it. But it is not a physical button. This is just a sensor which you tap. It also does not act as a home button. So that's something you might have to get used to if you're used to using a phone with a button in that location. Now, as always, the back panels are removable, and there is a thumbnail port toward the bottom that allows you to pry this off. And once you pry this off, you'll find a sealed-in 3,000 milliamp hour battery. You'll also find 2 slots, a micro SD card slot for memory expansion. You'll also find a micro SIM slot. Now, this does include a nano SIM tray, so if you're using the nano SIM, they've included the adapter, but if you have a micro SIM, you can just remove the nano SIM and install that. Unfortunately, what you won't find back here is NFC. That means the Moto G4 Plus cannot be used with contactless payment systems, even though it has a fingerprint scanner. Now, in terms of design, both phones basically look the same. They have the same screen size, the same materials and body design, and the same color options. Obviously, the big difference here on the G4 Plus is the fingerprint scanner. If you look closely at the camera module, you'll also see differences. The G4 Plus has a much larger aperture and a larger lens, so the camera looks slightly larger if you look at the lens. And you also see that we have the laser AF system just above it, which we don't have on the G4. On the back, we have a textured back panel, which has a nice grippy feel. It also feels nice and durable. Along the sides, we have a harder plastic, which is color matched depending on whatever color you've gone with, so the black phone gets a darker finish versus the white phone. Along the back, just above the camera, you'll find one of the microphones, and we also have that famous Moto dimple toward the center. Toward the top, we'll find a center-mounted headphone jack and that classic curve toward the top, which a lot of Motorola phones have had. Toward the bottom, you'll find the micro USB charging port in addition to the thumbnail port for popping off the back panel. Along the right side, we'll find all of our buttons, including the volume rocker just below the sleep-wake power button. The power button itself is textured, so you can feel and distinguish it between that and the volume control just below it. Now, these buttons are rather thin and kind of mushy, so sometimes it's hard to operate them accurately, so I kind of find myself mashing them trying to find the right point on the volume rocker to adjust it. Toward the top on the front, you'll find your earpiece, which is also your loudspeaker. So you have a front-facing loudspeaker. Now, the quality of the speaker isn't the best, but it is facing in the right direction this time. So again, it's a nice loudspeaker, but it would be nice to have stereo speakers like Motorola has done in the past. Now, in terms of the camera, both of them are identical, 5 megapixels with an f2.2 aperture. And of course, we have our ambient light sensor and proximity sensor, which is more obvious with a white bezel. Instead of a notification notification LED light, we have Moto Display, so the display lights up to show you your notifications when they're received. This also works when you handle the phone, so if you pick it up, it will flash your notifications, or if you pick it up out of your pocket. So this is a nice feature for quickly glancing at your notifications without unlocking or waking it up. Now in terms of our displays, both of them are 5.5-inch 1080p displays with an IPS LCD panel. Now although both displays have the same specs, to my eyes they look very different. Both displays are extremely bright, but the G4 is a little more washed out. It's also quite a bit warmer and more saturated, so the color vibrancy definitely isn't there on the G4 compared to the G4 Plus, which has deeper blacks and more vibrant colors, and generally speaking looks a bit more white compared to the more yellowish color of the G4. Now in terms of the camera hardware, there is some significant differences. The G4 Plus has a 16 megapixel sensor with an f2.0 aperture, while the G4 has a 13 megapixel sensor also with an f2.0 aperture. Both of them do get dual tone LED flashes but no optical image stabilization, and neither of them record in 4K video. The best they can do is 1080p. When it comes to specs, both phones are powered by a Snapdragon 617 with an Adreno 405 GPU. Where they differ, however, is in RAM. So we have 2 gigs of RAM on the standard G4 and 4 gigs of RAM on the G4 Plus. That is a lot of RAM for a mid-range or budget phone. And because we have the same processors, we see roughly the same performance for both phones in terms of our Geekbench scores. And our scores are fairly decent for a mid-range or budget smartphone, and certainly a big improvement over the previous Moto G3. So when it comes to performance, the big difference here is in RAM usage. And obviously with the G4 Plus, you have a little more breathing room, which means you have more stable performance overall. Now I did run into some issues with the standard Moto G, especially when I've been recording video or if I've had a lot of apps open in the background. Sometimes things start to slow down and you'll see a drop in frame rate. It's actually somewhat difficult to recreate here, but generally speaking, the G4 Plus has been a rock solid phone, while the G4 has had some performance issues during my testing. In terms of our battery, again, both of them have 3000 mAh batteries with turbocharging built in. And when it comes to my benchmark testing with the screen set to maximum brightness, I'm able to achieve 5 hours of on-screen time. That's really impressive performance for any flagship phone today. Usually I'm hoping for 4 to 5 hours, so when you land on 5 hours at this price, I think that's pretty impressive. And because both of these phones are compatible with turbocharging, these are the most affordable, rapid charging phones you can buy right now, which is a really nice feature to have. Now, when it comes to picture quality, the differences here are not as big as I expected. In terms of resolution, obviously 60 megapixels is quite a bit more resolution than 13 megapixels, but the differences are not immediately clear unless you're cropping or zooming in. So if you plan to do a lot of editing on your photos, you may want to go with the larger 16 megapixel G4 Plus if you really want that editing capability. But at first glance, both images look very similar. They have the same amount of exposure, same color reproduction, and generally speaking, they're able to produce very similar and solid images. My only complaint is that they tend to overexpose to bring up shadows, but otherwise color reproduction is really good. The big functional difference between these cameras really comes down to the AF system. The laser AF on the Moto G4 Plus is much faster than the Moto G4, which is much less accurate and tends to hunt around very disruptively. And when it comes to low light performance, both cameras have an f2.0 aperture, so they're not big apertures that let a lot of light in, but the G4 Plus definitely exhibits better performance in low light with more accurate color reproduction and better exposure, but there is still obvious signs of noise. Of course, you can also use the dual tone LED flash to lighten things up, but again, it's better off that you not use that because it does wash things out. In terms of video, both cameras basically look the same. They deliver 1080p at 30 frames per second without stabilization, so it can look a little rough. The only big difference here seems to be in terms of the AF system. It's much faster on the G4 Plus than the G4, and that does make a difference. What's up guys, Mike here, the Detroit Borg, testing out the front-facing camera of the Moto G4, which is identical on all versions of this phone. So that's a 5 megapixel sensor with 1080p HD video. It's a fairly decent camera here, good color reproduction and sharpness, so it's nice and clear with a good amount of exposure. But it does have some issues here. So for example, if I stand in front of a backlight like this window or something like that, it's not really tracking my face too well, so it kind of blows it out. Sometimes there's also issues with white balance. So white balance can jump around, so sometimes I can look really orange, and other times I'll look very cool and blue. So there's some issues in terms of software, but otherwise it's a fairly decent camera with an okay microphone. So in terms of the fingerprint scanner on the G4 Plus, it works very similar to other flagship smartphones. All you have to do is lightly tap your finger to the fingerprint sensor and it unlocks it right away for you. It's very quick. It's not the most reliable or the fastest fingerprint scanner I've seen, but it's great to have at this price point. So in terms of the G4, obviously no fingerprint scanner here, but it does have our ambient display mode. So this allows me to swipe up on the display to unlock it really quickly without hitting the lock button. So in terms of the interface, both of them are basically identical. The only difference here is the wallpaper, the stock or the default wallpaper is different for each model. But otherwise they have the same software experience. The only difference here is that we have a fingerprint sensor with all the settings for it on the G4 Plus, which obviously the G4 doesn't have. So in terms of the software experience, it's very close to stock Android and very smooth, especially on the G4 Plus. If we swipe to the right, we get to our Google Now launcher, and if we tap and hold on the home button, we launch into Google Now on tap. Tap and hold on the home screen and you get to your editor, which includes our wallpapers. You can see the wallpapers that they have added here. So if you want to add something different, you can go ahead and select one of these as well. We also have our widget interface, very close to stock Android, and our settings for the Google Now launcher. We have our swipe down gesture for our notification panel with our quick setting toggles up top, and again, all stock Android with our flashlight toggle as well as our do not disturb and more. You can jump to your settings up top, and again, very close to stock Android. We do have a few Motorola apps here that are pretty familiar. One of them is this Moto section for actions and display. If we tap on actions, we have these motions that we can make on the phone in order to activate features such as chop twice for the flashlight, flip for do not disturb. So if you get a phone call or an alarm is going off, just flip the phone over to mute them. Pick up the phone to stop ringing. So if the phone is ringing, if you just handle it, it stops the ringing. And then you can twist for quick capture, which is a feature I use all the time. So if the device is locked, all I have to do is twist it, launches into the camera app, and you can snap your photograph. And just to show you the other features, we have chop twice for the LED flashlight, which you can also use to turn it off. We also have another familiar feature, which is Moto Display. So this will flash your notifications on your lock screen as you receive them, and occasionally it also just cycles to show you your notifications. And if you handle your phone, this will also flash the notifications and allow you to swipe to unlock it or to access your notifications really quickly. It's a feature I really like, and you can block certain apps from doing this if you want, so you can add apps that you don't want to push notifications to the lock screen. You can also change permissions here for how much details you want, so you can show all notification content, hide sensitive notification content, or don't show notifications at all. We can also keep the screen dark between certain times, so if you don't want this flashing overnight when you receive notifications, you can automatically kick this in, and you can also vibrate on touch if you have pending notifications which you haven't taken a look at yet, so this will vibrate to let you know that something is there waiting for you. Now curiously, there is some differences here when it comes to showing your notifications on the lock screen. We have more options on the G4 Plus than we do on the standard G4. Another Motorola app here is the FM radio, which is available on both phones. So all you have to do is connect a set of headphones to act as your antenna, and you can go ahead and scan all your stations and toggle through your stations like so, jump to your list of stations, or you can favorite your stations like so, and then you'll see your favorite stations highlighted here. The great thing here is you can toggle between your speaker and your headphones with this little button here. So if you want to listen to your radio on your phone without listening to your headphones, that's kind of nice. You can do that right here. We also get a help app, which is kind of a user manual. So if you want to know more about your device and how to use some of the features or even optimize your battery life, this will load some documents from the web, which you can read through to help you out. Both devices also get this widget on the home screen by default, which I don't find terribly useful, but it does show you the weather, the current time, in addition to your calendar events. So if you tap on this, you can see your current weather conditions. You can tap on this to jump to the clock app for setting alarms, and then you can jump to your calendar. So when it comes to settings, it's fairly close to stock Android, and the features that are unique to this device can be found under display settings. So we have color mode, which gives us normal or vibrant, and vibrant is on by default. We also have double press the power button to activate the camera. So you can turn this on, it's on by default. So if I lock the device, double press that power button, activates the camera app. This also works when you're within app, so just double press the power button, takes you right to the camera app. Now in terms of the camera app, even though we have different cameras, each one basically works the same. So we do have tap to focus, and of course we have laser AF on the G4 Plus, which we don't have on the standard G4. So AF is much faster and more accurate on the G4 Plus. But the interface here is the same with most of the same features. So you can tap on the shot to find the right exposure and focus point for where you want it, and then you can manually adjust the exposure like so. Snap your photograph, and you can see the G4 is much slower. Tap and hold. You can see we have burst shot on the G4 Plus, which is much faster than burst mode on the G4. Now if we tap on the icon in the lower right corner, we can get to our different modes. So we have video, So we can go ahead and record video, swipe up and down to zoom in and out, in addition to tap to expose and focus, and we can also snap photographs while recording video, stop it, pause it, or whatever. Getting back to our other modes here, we do have panorama in addition to slow motion, and we have professional mode. So with professional mode, you can manually adjust all the settings for the camera, and it works the same on both devices, but it's kind of hard to demonstrate on both devices at the same time. But basically, you can tap on this to manually adjust exposure, ISO, your camera speed or shutter speed, and we have our white balance in addition to our focus depth. You can also refresh this back to default if you want, and if you tap this arrow here, you can expand out to see all these settings, which you can adjust at the same time. We can also swipe right to get to our settings panel, and for the most part, these are identical. There is text here for quick capture, which you don't have on the G4 for some reason, but otherwise the feature works the same. You can see the photo size is obviously different for the rear cameras, so we have 4:3 for a full 16 or 13 megapixels, but if you want to crop it down for widescreen, you're at 11.9 or 9.7, so obviously less resolution to work with on the standard G4. But otherwise, the features are the same. We have the same video resolution, 1080p at 30 frames per second, and we also have the same settings for slow motion, which is basically 540p at 120 frames per second. So once again, the Moto G4 really stands out as one of the most compelling smartphone bargains today, and is one of those $200 smartphones I can recommend to people who are looking at a budget smartphone. Of course, I would personally recommend upgrading to the Moto G4 Plus at 64 gigs, which gets you better performance thanks to the 4 gigs of RAM, a slightly better display and camera system, and the convenience of a fingerprint scanner. And of course, you can completely customize the design of your phone from the factory, which is kind of a luxury experience for a budget smartphone. Alright guys, hope you enjoyed this look at the Moto G4. If you did, please give it a thumbs up to let me know, and I'll see you again in the next video.